One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. As much as it's lovely to sit together and listen to music in a Zoom room, it's also nice to get to the reason why we're here, which is to hear some readings from some books and have some conversations. It's so nice that you're all joining us in this time where it's been very hard to gather. And I know it's not quite the same as being here all in person, but it sure is nice to be able to have some far-flung folks from Iowa City, the Bay Area, Vancouver, and as far as up the street in Echo Park. I'm Agnes from Skylight Books in Los Feliz, Los Angeles, and we are so thrilled to have our authors tonight from the Objects Lesson series. We'll get to hear a little bit from each of them, readings from their books, and then we'll get to hear them chat a little bit, have some conversation together, and then I'll open it up to questions and comments and responses from you all. And we can do that either in the chat or in vocally live, but we'll get there to the technical side of that when we get there. In the meantime, just a little bit of an orientation. If you haven't seen them, these are very handsome books, and here's the way in which they're described. Object Lessons is a series of concise, collectible, and beautifully designed books about the hidden lives of ordinary things. Each book starts from a specific inspiration, an historical event, literary passage, a personal narrative, a technological innovation, and from that starting point explores the object of the title, gleaning a singular lesson or multiple lessons along the way. Object Lessons tells the story of how we got here, one object at a time. And the next time you're able to come into Skylight Books, which if you are in town, we're finally open this week, you can come in from 10 to 5 and finally browse our store again, or order over the phone or online. I hope you take a look. It's a really beautiful series, and I always love flipping through them when it comes time to shelve them and they come into the store. All right, without further ado, let's dive in. We decided to go in alphabetical order of the objects we're hearing about. So I think it's like a nice way of foregrounding this sort of material reality of what we're discussing in a world where we're all a little bit immaterial on these screens. So I'm going to start with Erik Anderson, who's written about Bird. Erik Anderson is the author of 3 prior books of nonfiction: The Poetics of Trespass, A Stranger, and Flutter Point Essays. He teaches creative writing at Franklin and Marshall College, where from 2014 to 2019, he directed the annual Emerging Writers Festival. Let's have a very warm, if not vocal, if not auditory welcome, at least sort of cosmic across the airwaves, welcome for Erik Anderson.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thank you, Agnes and Skylight Books for hosting us. I'm going to read very briefly from this book, Bird, and I will just say as a sort of framing for what I'm going to read, the book is divided up into sort of 4 longer narrative nonfiction, kind of long-form journalism sections, and interspersed between them are these sort of bird field guide-like entries. And I'm going to read one of those tonight. I just have to give a shout out to my high school English teacher, Karen Van Putten, who I have not seen in more than 20 years. And I am just so delighted by your presence. Without Karen's encouragement, honestly, I would not be where I am today in any way, shape, or form. So it's just such a delight to see you. Thank you for coming. And thank you to everyone else as well who is joining us this evening. I'm going to read Lesser Snow Goose. And yeah, I'm just going to dive in. It's the scene where Macduff, foil to Macbeth's eponymous villain, has come to convince Malcolm, elder son of the slain Scottish king, to seek revenge. Malcolm hesitates. Who is he to judge, he wonders, when all the particulars of vice are so grafted in himself, when there's no bottom, none, to his voluptuousness, to the cistern of his lust. That black Macbeth will seem as pure as snow, a veritable lamb by comparison. In the West, tradition holds that brides wear white to signify a virgin body and a chaste heart, that the bird returning to the ark with an olive branch, eternal symbol of peace and love, was a dove. But as for the often overlooked blackbirds, family Icteridae, writes J. Drew Lanham, they are not just maligned for their blackness, they are declining across the board. And then there are crows, he says, among the smartest things with feathers and wings, that they, along with other birds that just happen to be black, are largely ignored and often persecuted. Well, Lanham writes, sounds like profiling to me. To appreciate nature, Lanham reminds us, is to partake in a tradition founded by and for white elites. And while the natural world isn't white, nature as a concept may be. My choice of career and my passion for wildness, Lanham says, means that I will forever be the odd bird, the raven in a horde of white doves, the blackbird in a flock of snow buntings. Because for Lanham, the preconceived notions of where I should go, of what I should do, and even who I should do it with, don't include forests, marshes, or mountains. The disquieting question is where in nature a black person belongs, and where, conversely, a white one does. But if the case of the lesser snow goose is any indication, we've been profiling the wrong birds. It would be one thing if these innocent-looking geese, as one researcher describes them, presumably because of their white plumage, were, to borrow Malcolm's term, merely voluptuous. But they're more vicious and coercive than that. Although the birds mate for life, what scientists call forced copulations are rampant, typically occurring while the male is away from the nest, often pursuing a forced copulation of his own. To his credit, if and when the resident gander sees his mate attacked, he immediately returns, pecking and kicking and beating the intruder so vigorously that, at least in one instance, it resulted in something researchers might have euphemistically termed forced death. Alas, poor country, almost afraid to know itself, intones a third character, Ross, as a segue to telling Macduff that while he has been biding his time, his family's been murdered by the bloodthirsty king. Our country, he continues, anticipating our own, where violent sorrow seems a modern ecstasy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful. I'm going to keep rolling, and I'll get to talk later. I have tempted to want to say all sorts of things after hearing that, but let's keep moving. Next up, we're going to hear about Cell Tower with Stephen Jones. Stephen Jones is De Bartolo Chair in Liberal Arts and Professor of English and Digital Humanities in the Department of English at the University of South Florida. He is author or editor of 11 books on literature, technology, media, and the digital humanities. Let's beam a warm digital welcome to Stephen Jones.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Did the unmute work? Excellent. So my book, thanks Agnes very much, and thanks to Skylight Books. I'm really happy to be participating in this event tonight, and for everybody who came. My book is about the cell tower as an object, but in a way it's about what the cell tower opens up for us, which is all that infrastructure that we become increasingly surrounded with every day. So it's a kind of travelogue, and I notice cell towers everywhere I go. So it starts in Florida where I live, and it ends in the Keys near where I live as well. Someone I know in rural Appalachia can stand in her kitchen, look out through the screen door, and point across adjacent fields to her tower, silhouetted up on a mountain ridge, a tapered latticework structure with a triangular rack around the top, like an 18th century tricorn hat, mounted with 3 sets of oblong white antenna panels. Cell sites in that area are so sparse, she's probably right. She likely does know where her connection comes from, at least when she's in the house and the yard. If she drives to the Walmart 30 miles away, she'll probably drop the signal more than once, either because she gets out of range of that tower and isn't in range of another, or because the rock-faced mountains interfere, creating radio shadows where the signal just can't reach. I, on the other hand, drive past 30 cell towers on my 40-mile commute. That's 30 actual towers, not counting various antenna arrays mounted on rooftops around the perimeter of water tower tanks. I see those too. This is in Florida, which is close to sea level everywhere, and I travel mostly on an elevated highway, so I can see pretty far to the horizon in most places. Tall objects really stand out. In the metropolitan area of Tampa Bay, with very little public transportation, unlike in cities where I've lived before, I have to make this drive several times a week, and I always feel guilty about it. One day, sitting in traffic on the bridge and plotting the purchase of an electric vehicle, I looked up and noticed all the cell towers. It dawned on me, all this infrastructure, bridge, a highway, the towers, none of it is beneath me, beneath my everyday life, as the prefix infra might imply. It is my everyday life. I'm inside it. Now, 30 is a lot of towers. Depending on where you live, you may have that many cell towers near you too, maybe more. But do you ever really notice? Mostly we don't, or rather, we prefer to unsee them, to look right through them and immediately forget we've ever seen them. The cell tower is a giant piece of infrastructure we depend on every day, but we're so invested in the idea that the cell phone experience should be seamless, invisible, ethereal, and ubiquitous, we just screen it out. We just don't see it looming there. We unsee it. I began this book because I started noticing those cell towers. Eventually, I made a kind of game of it, developing a habit I jokingly called cell spotting. Like a train spotter, a nerdy railway hobbyist, especially in the UK, who treats transportation infrastructure the way bird watchers treat rare species in the wild, recording the models and individual serial numbers of locomotives they see on platforms or passing by on the tracks. I look out for cell towers anywhere I travel now. It all started with those 30 towers on that 50-minute drive from a small barrier island on the Gulf of Mexico to the urban campus where I teach, traveling over the causeway and a 3-mile bridge across the sparkling waters of Tampa Bay. On the bridge, I often see brown pelicans flying along beside the car at eye level, then disappearing as they dive for fish. Sometimes an osprey sits on a light pole to eat a fish it just caught down between the concrete pilings. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I love you talk about being inside the web of the net, and here we are with birds sort of weaving their way from Erik to you, Stephen. So
exactly.
Thank you. Next up, we have Coffee with Dinah Lenney. Dinah Lenney is the author of The Object Parade and Bigger Than Life, A Murder, a Memoir. She also co-edited Brief Encounters, a collection of contemporary nonfiction with the late Judith Kitchen. She teaches nonfiction for the Bennington Writing Seminars and serves as editor-at-large for the Los Angeles Review of Books. have a warm welcome for Dinah Lenney.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Mutes work? Great, great. I loved hearing those two pieces, Erik and Steve. Thank you. And Agnes, thank you to you and to Skylight. Skylight is my neighborhood store. This is where I buy my books. So I'm really delighted that you found time to do this with us, and it's so generous. And it's so generous of all of you. I'm looking at names and faces. It's so generous of all of you to come. Thank you so much for being here. Coffee is about coffee, and it's about memory, and it's about place. And I don't want to apologize. It's about me. There's a memoir component to it. I'm going to read to you from a chapter it's pretty much in the middle of the book, and it's called Coffee in Paris. And I'm just going to plop you down in the middle of Paris. But out in the world, in all those cafes, did we notice the coffee was lousy? No way. Like the Americans we ordered cafe au lait, which, thinking back taste-wise, wasn't anything special. And we didn't mind a bit. We even enjoyed it, savored it. Didn't we keep having creme after creme because everything else was so wonderful? The light, the air, the trees, the flowers, the bread, my God, the bread. The omelets, the salades, the glace vanille, the action inside and out on the street. Paris, a million places to drink coffee. Everyone is drinking coffee everywhere, but they don't make a deal of it. There aren't 47 varieties to choose from or 5 different kinds of milk. And starting well before lunch, they're just as likely to be pouring rosé or beer or limonada. They're not promoting a brand of anything, only a whole way of life, that's all. In Paris, you don't have to order up a cappuccino with soy or whatever to be the kind of person who takes time to be a person in the middle of the day. So the coffee mostly tastes the same from place to place. A bit better here, a bit worse there. It's just as a friend told me, ask people about the best cup of coffee they've ever had, and they don't talk about taste. One of the best coffees I ever had, brought to me, by Café Rostand in Paris, where we sat just behind a little old woman in a yellow cap, who was first delighted by the young foreigners at the adjacent table, and then, after they left, by an equally ancient gentleman, whom she greeted with such effusiveness. "Assieds-toi," she said, patting the chair beside her, and gingerly they kissed each other's worn cheeks, spotted and crinkled, and she told him about the girls who had only just left, les jeunes filles adorables, and then, minutes later, they rose together and ambled, shuffled, hobbled away, arm in arm, with their canes. We finished our salads, niçoise for me, the house special for him. Him is Fred, my husband. He is Fred. Tiny crevette in a mayonnaise dressing on a bed of butter lettuce, and my God, the bread. And then we ordered 2 café crème, which came each with a cookie in the saucer and its own little pitcher of very hot milk. Across the street, there was a clown entertaining the crowd walking in and out of the Luxembourg Gardens. We could have sat there all day. A week or so later, during dinner with friends in a bistro not far from the Seine, I mentioned I was writing a book about coffee. "You should call it Carte Noire," said the woman sitting next to me. Carte Noire? Really? That's the coffee we buy in Paris when we realize we're all out of coffee and it's late and only the mini mart on the corner is open and that's all they have. I don't say that to her, but Carte Noire, it's the supermarket brand, cheap, easy, ubiquitous. It's regular old French coffee, she says, and it's wonderful. Is it? We happen to have a bag at the flat. When we get back, I'd stick my nose in the grounds. Carte Noire smells bitter and stale. I'll drink it, but I won't like it. That's what I think. The next morning, Fred's making his own little 1 cup. We've got a bag from Coutume and another from Hexagon, both specialty shops on the right bank. But wouldn't you know the power of suggestion, he goes for the Carte Noire. "How's your coffee?" I ask. "Delicious," he says. "Can we get this in LA?" In fact, I don't think we can. According to the site online, it's available in France or the United Kingdom only. And how about this no-nonsense labeling, simply rond et généreux or rond et équilibre, none of the stuff about flowers and fruit. But what does it mean? How does round taste? And how is the flavor of generosity different from balance? And which would you choose? And anyway, it isn't very good, really not. But it isn't Carte Noire Fred wants back in Los Angeles. It's Paris. It's the view from the flat down Boulevard Gay-Lussac, the quick jaunt from there to the Medici fountain, the bread he'll bring back from the boulangerie on the corner, une baguette traditionnelle. It's Paris he's tasting, Paris he wants to take home. Thanks.
Thank you. It strikes me that the quality of attention and expansion that you're each giving to these objects feels like that phrase you used earlier, Dinah, about the taking the time to be a person in the middle of the day, like in the midst of our lives. That's when you sit and read and hear people read. That's a little taste of what you get. So thank you. It's wonderful. Next up, we go to environment, also available in most mini marts in Paris, which is brought to us by Rolf Halden. Rolf Halden is a professor and director of the Biodesign Center for Environmental Health Engineering at Arizona State University and founder of the ASU Foundation's nonprofit project One Water, One Health. It provides COVID-19 wastewater testing for underserved US communities. Let's have a warm welcome for Rolf.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. It's great to see faces. It can become lonely in the environments that we all individually experience. So my book I wrote out of frustration, really. I've been studying the environment and people's health for many, many years. And I look at toxins. I look at where toxins are produced, how they move through the environment, how they end up in places where they are not supposed to be, like children and the newborns. And so we analyze, for example, blood from newborns and see a plethora of toxins that already have been stored up in the belly and in the fat tissue of the mother, and that get transferred to the baby. And so as a scientist, I'm struggling with communicating what I see in the laboratory, which seems unbelievable that we are so, at such a massive scale with so many different chemicals violating not only our environment, but ourselves too, because the two are really inseparable. And so out of this frustration and the event of the Earth Day 50, I wrote this book last year, and it arrived. And our environment has changed a lot since we got this book to press. And I like to read to you just a short passage from the end and then something from the beginning. And it takes on a completely different meaning now in the pandemic times that we're in. But I think that many more people are now aware of what the environment is and what it does to us and how we influence the environment. And maybe to understand the first paragraph that I read, I have to say that I'm a wastewater-based epidemiologist. So I look at your health, at population health, by studying wastewater. Now, only a few months back, nobody knew what that was, but now you probably have read about it because a lot of people, including myself, are measuring SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, in wastewater around the world. And we actually have stood up the first dashboard that displays these data for a community at different neighborhood levels in Tempe, Arizona. So go to covid19.tempe.gov. And I put this into the chat box when I'm done here. And you can actually look at where, how many virus particles are present in wastewater right now, giving us a sense of how we are interacting with the environment and how we create an environment for each other. So this comes from chapter 14, One with the Environment. Our studies of human populations worldwide show that we cannot hide from our actions, cannot hide from the chemistry we are and produce. Regardless of where the emissions of persistent and harmful chemicals originate globally, we all get exposed. The actions taken by people living on the opposite side of the world affect our health, and our consumption affects the health of our antipodes. We create each other's environment, and we are responsible for and dictate each other's health. This applies at different scales and to different threats. Carcinogenic dioxins created by wildfires burning in the Amazon and by trash burning in Indonesia will be carried around the world to reach us and to accumulate in our bodies. As the Amazon continues to burn, loss of this green lung will make it difficult for us to breathe, and it will change our weather. A person sick with the flu deciding to go to work anyway will spread a virus that may go on to kill a susceptible elderly person or a prematurely born infant. And then moving to the beginning, a short passage. It's good not to be alone. There are many of us, and we are not defenseless, not anymore. As we grow and mature, a transformation sets in, though. Roles become reversed, and they do so at different scales. Once just timid prey, subject to nature's whims, we now have evolved into a species representing the planet's top predator. We have usurped full control over what we call the environment. But one existential lesson still remains to be learned. The boundaries we have internalized and observe are imaginary. They do not exist. The concept of self and the surrounding environment is a cherished delusion. The environment is simply not just out there. We breathe it, we eat it, we drink it, we wear it, we create it. We and the environment are one and the same. And so that I think is a lesson that I tried to make, and then the virus made it for me much better than this book could. So thank you.
Thank you. I guess we're all co-writing with the world as it unfolds around us, but that's such a profound reflection. I think I can feel in everybody's that idea of these illusory boundaries between ourselves and the world. And so yeah, thank you. That was wonderful. Next up, we're going to turn to Steve Mentz, who will give us our last reading, and then we'll pivot us into some conversation among the writers. So I'm excited to pass it over to him. Steve is writing about ocean. Steve Mentz teaches at St. John's University in New York City. He writes mostly about watery things, and his books include Oceanic New York and Shipwreck Modernity. He also writes about Shakespeare, the blue humanities, and environmental theory. Let's have a warm welcome for Steve Mentz.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? I think I'm working. It's really such a pleasure to be here in this virtual space from the other side of the country, and to be gathered with these amazing authors and all the people who are so generous with your time to listen to us. I feel particularly sort of privileged to go last at the end of this lineup of objects, because one of the things I love most about being part of this series is the incredible way it guides our attention, right? From bird to cell tower to coffee to environment to ocean. I'm going to do my best not to sort of drop the baton on the relay while I think about the way in which ocean can be conceived as an object in both the sort of personal way that I think Rolf was talking about, the object that reminds us that we are not singular selves, and maybe also to some degree in the intimate ways that Erik and Steve and Dinah have also shown us in their beautiful readings. So my book is a history. I start with the origin of the ocean 4.5 billion years ago, shortly after planetary formation, and I go more or less up into the present, into my own sort of daily practice as an open water swimmer in Long Island Sound here on the East Coast. The passage I'm going to read today is just a tiny little bit out of the section on the 19th century. I'm sort of thinking about the 19th century here as a kind of pivot, a period of extraordinary sea travel in human history, probably the greatest period of sea travel in human history, 19th into the early 20th century before it gets overtaken by airplanes. And I'm thinking here about a dream or a kind of fantasy of the 19th century, which is the idea that a human can really be partly a marine creature. And the two primary examples that I'm going to use for that are the harpooner Queequeg from Melville's Moby Dick, and the Little Mermaid from the Hans Christian Andersen's tale. And my argument in this piece is that these two figures are deeply similar and actually have the same kind of relationship with us. Anyway, so the chapter is called Queequeg and Other Mermaids. Romantic sea fever followed European maritime empires around the globe during the 19th century. Visions of human intimacy with the ocean faced off against snowy alpine peaks as the essential vistas of the romantic sublime. Keats's eternal whisperings and mighty swell in his poem The Sea associated the marine with human longings, and Lord Tennyson's Crossing the Bar made mortality itself assume an oceanic shape, with death arriving as a tide that moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam. Lurking behind these poetic portraits of the human ocean encounter was the fantasy of a truly marine human, a fish-man hybrid who could be at home in the waves. The Ovidian figure of Glaucus, a mortal fisherman who becomes a sea god after ingesting a magical herb, becomes in William Diper's piscatorial Nereids, or the Sea Eclogues, a poetic representation of marine utopia, where unmixed waters are as crystal clear. Mermaids, sirens, selkies, and other half-human oceanic creatures were already familiar in ancient and Renaissance folklore and mythology. In fact, Columbus claimed to have sighted mermaids off Hispaniola in 1493. But the surge in literacy and popular print culture in the 19th century increased the visibility of these creatures. The celebrated Hans Christian Andersen fable, The Little Mermaid, first published in 1837, presents a paradigmatic 19th century love tragedy underwritten by the desire to merge humans with the sea. The tale of the mermaid who loves a human prince enough to lose her tongue and to walk on knives propels itself through the alien lure of the oceanic world. Popular stories about mermaids, from Oscar Wilde's The Fisherman and His Soul to H.G. Wells' The Sea Lady and Edith Nesbit's Wet Magic, all written in the turn of the 20th century, reveal the continuing currency of a fantasy that would arrive in comic book form in the United States with DC's Aquaman in 1941, and on the big Hollywood screen in James Wan's $200 million blockbuster Aquaman starring Jason Momoa, which opened in the United States the week that I drafted this chapter. No mermaid of any era seems more aquatic or alluring than Queequeg, the cannibal hero who joins the narrator Ishmael to sail the world's oceans in Moby Dick. The bond between Queequeg and Ishmael captures the alien flavor of the human passion for the sea. When Ishmael calls his cannibal friend a pagan, we might substitute the word oceanic. "I'll try a pagan friend," says Ishmael, "since Christian kindness has proved but hollow courtesy." Queequeg the mermaid guides Ishmael into oceanic generosity and not only human vastness of vision. Queequeg and the Little Mermaid make an odd pair, with his bald head against her flowing hair and her fish's tail alongside his indecipherable tattoos. They have more in common than may appear at first. Both figures are otherworldly and oceanic. Both rescue lost sailors, and both relate to particular human beings through a radicalized version of romantic love, homoerotic in Queequeg's case and silent in the mermaid's. For Melville and for Andersen, these figures balance on the oceanic cusp, luring human swimmers just a bit farther into deep water than we can abide. The mermaid and the cannibal draw human love for the ocean out to the edge of human capacities. We love these figures, and they love us, because they dive deeper than we can. These not only humans bring us into the water for as long as we can endure it. Thank you. And then, since I am the last in the lineup of 5, it's going to fall to me to sort of bounce back a little bit to the 5 of us so that we can have a little conversation among ourselves before we open it up to some questions that I hope will soon populate the chat box on the side of the screen here. And so my sort of opening question for the 5 of us is to think about how living with these objects, writing about them, publishing a book about them, seeing this book go out into the world and having people talk to us about it, how has that object changed for each of us over the course of the couple of years maybe that we've been thinking and writing and publishing and listening to people respond to these things? And also, how might it have changed you? I mean, how does the ocean, I'm really obsessed in this book with trying to figure out the relationship between the human and the ocean. And I think a lot about the ways in which the ocean is changing in the current pressures of things like climate change. But I also think a lot about how attention to the ocean changes me as a person and as a writer and as a teacher and a dad and everything like that. So I just wondered if people wanted to comment on how your object has changed over this time and how you have changed in relationship to it.
Such a great question, Steve.
Yeah, it is. I think we've had if I can jump in, we had a discussion amongst some of us online about this, but the cell tower thing for me is also about romanticism, Steve. I mean, because I think that this is a kind of urge to transcendence that leads us to deny the materialities of the infrastructure, so that what we want is the magical, invisible connection that allows us to escape from mundane reality. So writing this has made me really self-conscious about my own desires in that direction. And then, of course, more recently, as I said in our earlier discussion online, the burning of the 5G towers, especially in the UK, seemed like a kind of fulfillment of the kind of prophecy in some ways. I also have written about the Luddites, about the historical Luddites. And so this is a very old sort of problem, but the idea that somehow the virus is connected to the 5G network, is actually, it's crazy in some ways. And on the other hand, the whole point of cellular infrastructure is to remain out of sight and secretive. And it's, they have a motto about security through obscurity. They borrow from the military industrial complex in general. So the idea is that the whole point of this is that we are supposed to, it's shrouded in various kinds of secrecy. And there are, people's paranoia is not about nothing, in other words, even if it's not scientifically grounded in this case, which it isn't. So those reactions are just among, nowadays there's so many reactions and so many things going on, seems like a drop in the bucket, but it really struck me as a kind of manifestation of people's anxieties about the secrecy of infrastructure. Yeah, Dinah, were you going to say something?
Coffee. Coffee is such an ancient beverage and such a universal sort of totem in so many different ways. But in lots of ways, before I started writing the book, I took coffee for granted. It seemed to me a very ordinary object. When I look at your titles, you guys, ocean is just, it sounds enormous to me, and bird, I feel that's easier for me to access, Erik, that it's because it's also something that I'm in daily contact with birds. Cell tower and environment, I'm daunted. Coffee, I supposed that I would not be daunted. And so what happened was, of course, I was surprised by how daunting the project became. But I think my relationship, in terms of the way my relationship to coffee has changed, so it's both more and less magical. There's a lot of science around coffee, but also the coffee we drink is much better now. As a family, having written this book, all of our associations, I think we all think about coffee a lot more than we did. We think about it personally, and we think about where it comes from, and the fact that, that most coffee comes from very far away. So those are some of the ways that it's the same and different. Rolf, you something?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I have to say I love this assembly here of the objects that we have, because who doesn't begin the day with a cup of coffee? So I have to immediately think of you. I step outside, I sit down and I listen to the hummingbirds that are out here in Arizona, and then and on a good day I call my daughter who studies in Germany. And I think about retirement in the ocean before I turn to to the tasks of analyzing water for all the new toxins du jour. So all of these cell tower, of course, came in, and so all these objects are very much represented. I think for the way my relationship to the environment has changed, maybe not so much, but more my understanding has improved with the pandemic of how much we are actually capable of changing. And I'm an optimist despite the fact that I see a lot of toxins doing a lot of bad things. I am optimistic that we can get a handle on it. But I think the outlook when I wrote the book was very different on what we are capable of changing in ourselves around us. And who would have predicted that we are capable of staying home, of not traveling, right? Of not eating out, and all the things, not going to work, wearing masks in the most unlikely places, and even in cars and stuff. So I think there is an appreciation in me, and hopefully in others too, that we are not as limited in the ability to change as we often feel we are. And because that's what it really needs, and what's required in order for us to create that future environment in which we can all thrive. And so I'm enheartened and happy to see that there is more on our end that we can do than I was able to see before. And so in that way, I see the environment in a different way, and each of you too.
So I'll just say, that I think I too am an optimist, and yet, I think my relationship to the material in Bird has changed post-pandemic, in that, I hate feeling like I'm saying I told you so, right? But I feel like a lot of the stuff that I was working through in the book, and I mean, Rolf touched on it, this sense of, we established these illusory boundaries between, what's me and what's the planet, right? Or what's like a safe ecosystem versus a degraded one, when those divisions are not real. They're imaginary, and they're problematic. And they create the conditions in which we find ourselves, right? We are not, I like Steve had this line, we are not singular selves, right? And I think for me, the, post-pandemic, really feeling like, that lesson needs to get hit home a little bit more. And, then let alone, what we're experiencing in terms of the movement for Black lives in this country. And, thinking about the entry that I read today, when that episode between Christian Cooper and Amy Cooper happened in Central Park, I'm sure everybody followed this story, right? It's like, oh shit, that's exactly what, I was describing, and I don't want to take credit for it, because J. Drew Lanham, an ecologist, has written extensively and eloquently about the perils of being a Black birder, right? And I am an optimist. I think, there are lessons to be learned from all of this, and learning that's happening as we speak. And yet I also feel at moments disheartened to see that in human history, we don't seem to be, on one level, very good at learning these lessons and changing our behavior.
We're so good at forgetting them. It's similar, Erik, the thing about coffee is that it comes from far away, and we think of it as sort of this just for instance, this American thing where we get up and we have our, cup of chock full of nuts, which in fact is coming from Africa somewhere. So yeah. What about you, Steve?
I also think that one of the things that has like I've been thinking about as I've been listening to everybody talk just now is this kind of both the desire to move past the singular self and also to assemble a kind of community. I think that the thing I'm writing about in the chapter I read from in Ocean really is about the way in which the ocean asks for different kinds of communal living. The ship is one fantasy of this in the 19th century, or the swimmer. But that there are different, like at the moment in which we recognize the sort of prison of the singular self is insufficient, it then makes necessary all these different kinds of contingent plural structures. And I also think about, and this is one of the things I've been thinking about in reading all of your books, for both me and for Rolf, Rachel Carson is a really important figure, a kind of, ocean scientist hero for both of us, I think. And the way in which Carson represents a kind of ethic of generosity and care, which is beyond the individual, beyond the personal self. I guess that's one of the things I think of when I'm wrestling with really what is both the status of the ocean in the present and also the status of, of our singular lives, each of our singular lives in the present too.
Yeah, Steve, Rachel Carson, I think she is similarly a person who was very unlikely to effect the change that she did, and it reminds me of what happens right now with Black Lives Matter, and everything else. I mean, there is just, if you find the right time, the right energy, then there is this wormhole where you can just bypass all the barriers that are always there, and for some reason at some moment in time they are not there, and then there are brave people that are at the right time in the right space, and they walk straight through and get to places that others really have no chance ever getting, because they might not have that that opportunity. And I feel that happened also for Greta Thunberg, and I hope it happens again, and there's good things happening despite what we have to live through right now. And it's a time to sit back and reflect on where we are and who we want to be, and how we want to kind of finish our lives and prepare the future for others. And I think all of the things we see right now in the news and the moments that we capture in our books, they remind us of that mission.
I'm not going to close down this conversation, but I want to get folks' brains turning a little bit about questions you might have for our 5 writers. And if you do have questions, the 2 ways that you can signal that you'd like to ask are typing it in the chat, either directly to me or to the group in general, and I'll read it aloud for all of us. Or if you raise your hand, which is actually a technological thing that's possible in this Zoom window. If you see at the bottom of your window, there's a button that says participants. And if you click on that button, a window will open in the top right with the names of everyone in this chat, and there should be a couple of little icons at the bottom of that box, and one is a blue hand. And if you click that blue hand, I will be able to see that you're raising your hand, and we'll call on you. But let's let people percolate for a second. Any last thoughts on the conversation we've just been having?
I wanted to just quickly pick up on something that Steve Jones said about the immaterial and paranoia, because I've been thinking. I mean, it's obviously something I think that as we are as we are, in a sense, brought out of our ordinary lives into this experience of solitude and spending a lot of time looking at highly populated Zoom screens. I think that I got you right, Steve, that you said paranoia is not about nothing, and that there's this like powerful desire to make sense of a world that is just always a little bit outside of our grasp. I love those depictions of the Florida landscape with the partly hidden but not entirely hidden cell towers, and I've actually been looking around in my Connecticut landscape trying to follow your pattern a little bit. But the idea that there's this hidden order which is doing its best to stay hidden, like to unpresent itself to us, and that part of our, I don't know, maybe our job or our capacity as thinking, observing people is to try to decipher this invisible infrastructure. I don't know. I've been thinking about that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, I think in some ways my idea was much more simple-minded, which is that actually they are out to get you. Sometimes that's that old joke, but it's true. I mean, there's an example in the book of a designer cell tower in Italy. That's a beautiful obelisk, with Murano glass tiles, millions of tiny Murano glass tiles lit from within on the piazza, but it contains hidden cameras, And part of its purpose is not just to be a cell tower, but to be a kind of, surveillance tool for the neighborhood. And the cameras can be attached to the outside too, and they look like little animals and birds. So that they, they're cute in this kind of abstract way. They have a kind of Euro modern kind of aesthetic. So there is this strange kind of infrastructure like that is one example of this larger issue that everybody's been talking about, which is the kind of boundary between the made world, the human, and the natural world that we inhabit and how we inhabit it. And there's at the same time, there are these sort of, let's admit it, political and economic forces that are sometimes, what we're paranoid about. And it's not that the cell tower causes the virus so much as that it's always listening to you, So there's an interesting kind of, but what lies behind it in some ways, is us. Right? This is the old Luddite problem. We made the damn things, and installed them and authorized them, and the construction of all of those phones in the labor practices that create those phones. We're all responsible, those of us who use this technology. And I think in some ways that's what we're most afraid of, is the sense that behind all of this infrastructure is something that we've wrought, something that we've created, and then try to deny. So anyway, that's.
Dinah, were you going to say something?
I just was going to say that, and we continue, as much as we, rail against all of it, we continue, try to disconnect. Who wants to really disconnect? And at the moment, I'm, I and everybody else I know is sort of fed up, for instance, with, say, Facebook. But if you're fed up with Facebook, then you have to also give up Instagram, and I couldn't possibly. So, so there's just a way in which we are so tangled up in it that it's easier to put your head down, and that's the problem.
Absolutely. This at Kashmir Hill did this excellent piece last year, about where she tried to do without the major stacks, the major platforms. And so that even when you think you've turned one off, the tentacles reach pretty far and you're still connected. So,
and it's easier to just pretend that you don't know that it's happening.
Yeah.
But I think, on that note, I like the cell tower as, in a way, an object lesson in of itself in what the series is trying to do, right? This idea that, these books are always asking, all of our books, I think, are asking us, that idea of the hidden lives of these things that we take for granted, and what's really operating, what's really operative when we, drink a cup of coffee or, admire a bird outside our window. So for instance, like when you're talking about a technology, Steve, I think about like nature as a technology too. It's absolutely a technology that we use, that we've created, and that we have lost the ability to see it for what it is. And that blinds us to all sorts of realities and consequences of our actions.
Yeah, I think that's very good. Tim Morton, the ecologist and philosopher, says that, nature itself is the problem. The construct of nature is the thing that gets in the way of our sort of confronting the world, that we live in. So.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and Tim also comes at that in part from reading Romanticism, right? He's a Shelley scholar, in fact, before he became a sort of international eco-star. But like the idea of the ecology without nature, it always seems to me comes so much out of the world of these 19th century Romantic poets who are trying to transcend the human into this kind of deified understanding of the sea, the ocean, the mountain. But you never quite get all the way out. Like you're always caught in this sort of egotistical loop.
Well, and partly, Steve, because they're trying desperately to do it in the midst of industrialization.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
I'd love to pivot us to some questions if that's all right. I have some have started coming in.
Let's do that.
I hope that this will continue to sort of foment conversation. Maxie Jane wants to know, as a question for you, Dinah, which I imagine there'll be applicability to others too. She says, Dinah, thank you for that beautiful reading. You mentioned the task was daunting. Did your experience with your morning cup of coffee help you gain a fresh perspective each day you were writing? Did you find part of the daunting nature of your task the careful dance between your memory and memoir and the study of something that is so personal to everyone else? You have such a gift for making us see ourselves in everything you write. Can you tell us more about that?
I shall try. Thank you, Max. So the first part of that was, did the coffee help me get past the daunting nature of the task? And it did. The coffee. What I discovered about coffee as a metaphor was that, if I was in trouble with the writing, then I had a cup of coffee. When I woke up in the morning and I had that cup of coffee, I thought, oh, well, I can do this. With those first sort of early morning thoughts. And in terms of the balance, I think you were asking about the balance of sort of memoir and writing about something that's important to everybody else. That was a very great draw for me. I did, in fact, and it's included in the book, I sent a questionnaire to sort of 35 odd people that I knew and asked them about their associations with coffee. I think in order to bolster my feeling that coffee is personal, and that a large part of writing this book was going to be about the personal connections that other people make, not just me. So yes, I don't know what the last part was.
I think that was the dance between memory and memoir and the study of something that's personal to everyone.
And such a great question. It was really helpful to jump out of my own skin and talk to other people about coffee.
Thanks. Other questions, welcome. I'm curious to ask, while other folks are still thinking, I was surprised at how much I heard an ethic in everything that all of you read about, that there's an ethic that sort of orbits around the object that you talk about. I imagine that there would be reflections on the meaning of this object in our society, but it seemed like there was an argument that emerged or seemed to start to emerge about how we might be in the world and how we are and how we might reconsider ourselves. And that your mention of Rachel Carson made me think of that. So I'm curious if that was something that feels true to you, and if so, what would you say is the ethic that you're suggesting to us? And was that something that was always in your mind when you started working on this object, or is that something that emerged for you in the course of thinking about it?
You asking me?
All of you, yeah.
Okay, well,
yeah.
To answer, this is something I really struggle with, because I have a sense that our ethics didn't grow as quickly as our ability to travel and to consume items that come from far away, like coffee, right? So we lost touch from this communal sense of where things come from, how much effort goes into creating them, and the people behind the product. This was something in the past that we had a strong connection to, and we would consume, I think, more responsibly, because we saw the hardship that it sometimes takes to make products. And we have completely lost that with globalization, because we can't look around the world to see what how hard the antipodes are working to make that cheap product that we consume and throw away and don't give even one thought, if not a second. And that happens. And then the cell tower came around, and information is flowing so quickly that we also, our ethics are not catching up with that either. So the responsibility that arises if whatever you say, including us right now on this podcast, what impact that can have, and what responsibility lies with communicating to large amounts of people is an incredible it's an incredible job and a responsibility. And I don't think we're trained, and I don't think that even the new generation that grew up online developed that. So I think ethics I'm really struggling with that lack of growth that we haven't undergone it, and we have to, in order to succeed in the future.
Others, I did.
sorry, I might talk about that one just real quick, because I love Rolf's answer about ethics as a kind of an incomplete project, a project that we're in the process of trying to develop. I guess when I think, I mean, again, this, my book has this really long span of history that I'm trying to cover. And I think that I was always really conscious of two different ethical stances that were in tension with each other. One is this desire to connect, to go places, to bring places together, to connect physically with oceanic beings and people who live on other parts of the world, and also this sense that the ocean is a space of alienation and danger. So I like this constant, like, both invitation and expulsion, I guess, like a dialogue. The ocean is both a place which all human cultures are deeply indebted to and drawn to, but also a place that we can't live in a like literal physical sense. So that there's this kind of paradoxical or conflicted nature about the ethic, and I think a lot about the duality of that we are always in the process of changing our ethical stance in relationship to changes with the weather in a very literal sense.
I would just maybe put like a slightly different spin, although I love and agree with what both Rolf and Steve have said, and both of those things feel very true and close. I think there's also a question as a writer of what's your ethical relationship to the material that you're writing about. And in my case, I mean, I think there was this tension between the kind of ethics, lived ethics that I came into the project with, certain environmental commitments, say, that very much shaped the way that I thought about nature, thought about birds, humans looking at birds, humans looking at nature, and yet also wanting to see the birds, right? Like wanting to be true to the birds as they are and not just use them as evidence, right, for an argument. And I think I managed to do both of those things pretty well, but I also felt throughout the process of writing it that was a tension that I had to find a way to work through. I love Chris's question though in the chat box, and I really want to answer that one.
Yeah, I think we should get there. I want to make sure, unless Stephen or Dinah, do you have anything you wanted to say about that last thing? Of an ethic?
So for me, I think I feel similarly to Erik, that my relationship, part of my changing relationship to coffee had to do with an understanding that coffee is in trouble. So in that sense, there was an ethic involved. But the larger kind of question for me in terms of coming to terms with what I was writing about had to do with writing about coming to terms with your own little square on the screen, if you will, with my life as it is. That there was some way in which I was writing about self-acceptance, perhaps, if that makes sense.
I love that. And I mean, I think that's, to develop from Erik's and Dinah's points, the writing about it is a way of modeling kind of the possibility of different kinds of relationships with these objects and with other objects in the world. You write, but even when you're not writing, we have these relationships with objects in the world. And so I find it, and so I tried to ask myself, it's a kind of exercise in imagination. What's it like to be a cell tower? What's it like to be? And there's a beautiful passage in Walter Benjamin about the Eiffel Tower. Actually, he's quoting somebody else as usual, but it gets credited to Benjamin. But he describes the view from high on the Eiffel Tower, whose latticework construction informs modern towers of all kinds, including cell towers. And says that from that height, speaking of Paris, looking around, everything streams through it, past that beam construction, that lattice work. It becomes a kind of prism through which we experience the rest of the external world. So there's a sense in which each object opens another way of viewing the other objects in the world. And I think that's an ethical imperative as well, to see outside of our own subjectivity. In at least it's impossible ultimately, but to make that effort in a kind of dialectical way is part of what I was looking for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you all for reflecting on that and indulging me. I think this will be the best way to bring us home, this question of Chris's, and I'll maybe start with you, Erik, first. I'll read it aloud just so for folks who can't see the chat. In the object parade, Dinah described an elementary school parade in which children dressed up as objects. Using each of your topics, what would your costume look like and feature? Go to Erik first.
I mean, I'm not sure I'm ready for the hot seat. If anybody else is prepared with a costume, I would appreciate somebody.
Well, you'd have to have plumage, wouldn't you?
No,
maybe. I don't know.
I think Erik, that you've got the, you've got the most costume ready of any of us. But maybe we'll flip the order. I went last in the reading, so maybe I can go first now. I mean, I don't know how to dress up as the ocean. I think that's actually kind of a tricky one, and part of the sort of challenge of thinking with the ocean and the human-ocean relationship is the kind of disparity between me and it. But there is that old kind of biological chestnut, right? That my body is 70-odd% salt water, and the ocean covers 71%, I guess, of the planet's surface. I mean, there is this kind of homology or relationship. So there is a way, like it'd be a really lousy costume to just show up as a person and say a person is also like salt water. But that's the lousy costume I think I would probably go with in the parade. So that's mine.
I have to go next. The question is, what would the environment wear in the parade? And I think it would wear the emperor's non-existent clothes. Why? Because the environment always wears itself outside. It's always there. So no matter what you cover it up with, it is just the environment, right? So that will be my quick answer. Let's see, who's next? Dinah?
It's such a great question. I mean, you should have seen these kids in this parade. They were so fabulous, the costumes. But I think, for me, first of all, there are so many coffee gifts. You can't believe it. You could find inspiration everywhere. But I think probably because I'm fairly vain, I would go as a Chemex, and I would that would be pretty fabulous with a bamboo kind of, collar or belted as such. Sounds good to me.
I love that. I think that since mine is sort of object-like already in a material and a concrete way, unlike a couple of the others, it's easy enough to imagine looking like a cell tower, I guess. That these architects' balls and so on in New York in the early 20th century, people did dress up as buildings and as bridges and structures, so that can be done. But the thing that I think I would actually do is come as one of those panel antennas, the oblong white panels that you see arrayed around the top of the cell tower, because that's the actual antenna on top of the tower. And what's inside of it is really interesting. It actually has 3 little antennas inside. So you could have that on your back as a kind of reveal. You could say the costume could be kind of 2-stage, but the front of it would just be plain white, fiberglass or metal. So that's easy enough. I think you're up again, Erik.
I'm ready now. You guys have inspired me. I'm prepared. Although I should say that I hate dress up. I just really do not enjoy costumes. I never have. It just hasn't been my cup of tea. So my costume is probably going to be bad. But I would say, because so much of the book is about romanticizing that plumage and the dangers that come with seeing birds as pretty objects, say. I think I'd be more inclined to dress as a pair of binoculars. And I think especially because so much of the book is about the way we look at birds, the way we look about nature, that feels like a more fitting costume, which is a shame because some of the, one of the things I learned, for instance, is that fashion designers regularly visit natural history collections to get inspiration from their bird collections. So, you can imagine a fashion designer looking at a, tray after tray of dead birds and like, there's the fall line, right?
And I was going to, I think this is a beautiful way to wrap it up. I was going to propose we could do it reality TV style, where you turn off your cameras for 10 minutes and have to come back with a look with whatever you have in the room. I think this is good. It's good to stay in the realm of the imagination because there's a lot of sophistication in your answers. All right. So grateful to have had you all with us. So grateful to everyone who came and joined us. We have copies of the books in the store if you care to come by and browse, or you can order over the phone, online. We ship out books to all places. Let's have one last sort of like emotional beaming of gratitude to Erik Anderson, Stephen Jones, Dinah, Lenney, Rolf Halden, and Steve Mentz. It was such a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your words, for your presence. And thank you all who came for joining us. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.
I see